certainly over this week, and of course going into last week as well, we've seen tougher and tougher restrictions being placed on the north of England. Now, these are in respect very obviously necessary. We've seen parts of the north spike dramatically, but you are going to see this repeated in the south pretty much soon. This is what tends to happen. The only thing is that we are really seeing here, not only are we seeing tough lockdown restrictions coming in, but we are not seeing the financial support being added to this. And we are seeing potentially the mayor, I can't remember his name, Andy something, the mayor of Greater Manchester, openly rebelling against the government, basically saying, we agree we need to go into lockdown, but you need to give us the cash to survive that lockdown. And it's very, very clear that there's going to have to be another furlough scheme put in place. The winter recovery package is just is nothing. If you are self-employed or a freelancer, in this package you pretty much get nothing. And remember, this is the Conservative Party, the party of British business. And I say British in big quotations because the Conservatives haven't really done anything to support British businesses in at least over the past decade. They've just done nothing to help or even aid them. So it's laughable. But this is the situation we are in. And we are seeing very serious... Remember, not too long ago, there was this... You go back, obviously, to the election, of course, all these red wall seats were won by a lot of the Conservatives, which gave Boris Johnson his majority. But the Conservatives were singing that this is the end of the red wall. This is, the end of these Labour heartlands. And now, just under literally a matter of months, all these people who originally voted for Boris Johnson's Brexit deal, one, aren't probably going to get a Brexit deal. I hope he does, but it's not going to be the deal that they envisioned. So that is going to go against them. Not only that, but they are seeing the north of England being treated like, just like a second world area. Almost, it just doesn't exist and it just doesn't deserve any sort of money. And this is the absolute insanity of where we are. The north is just going to be absolutely destitute in a way that we haven't seen since probably the 80s. And there is a reason why some northern politicians in the north are calling this the new harrying of the north, or the second harrying of the north. So this is just disaster on disaster waiting to happen. And I can tell you, my town is going to suffer hugely because there's already rumblings in the pipelines that from Saturday we could go into tier 3 lockdown. So this article that we're going to go through today on this comes from the Byline Times, and the title is "The North Will Soon Be Calling Last Orders on Boris Johnson." To put the pandemic in terms of the classical references so adored by the Prime Minister Boris Johnson, he faces a Herculean task. The pandemic that arrived so soon after his general election victory was the first for more than 100 years, a truly frightening sensation, and it required more than anything else good, decisive governance and leadership that earned the people's trust. It is therefore hard to understand why he decided to alienate a large section of the country, the very people whose support he needs right now. First, it was the devolved nations. His relationship with the often ignored legislators in the Holyrood and Cardiff has been tense at best, with leaders in both Wales and Scotland continuing to see Brexit legislation as a power grab by the centre. And the recent internal market bill has just made things worse. By confirming that this reality is just government for England, and not just an England, but southern England, Johnson has now taken his battle everywhere north of Birmingham. There is a strong sense that we in the north are being played in the interests of those who really haven't got a clue where Barnsley is. Hooray! And have no intention to visit. Played by those whose lives are so very different from ours that we may as well have just come off a different planet. Played in the presence of caring about devolution by giving us city mayors, but not the powers nor the responsibilities that should come with it. The coronavirus pandemic has thrown into sharp relief the staggering centralisation in Westminster at the expense of the nations and regions. Early on, mayors were crying out not just to have more resources, but more powers to respond to the pandemic. Voices from the independent SAGE group were saying the same thing. Quietly, so were our directors of Public Health England. So if you want to play a game of whack-a-mole, then actually give the hammer to those on the ground who know the rules of the game and who know their people. The news last Thursday, shared by newspapers, rather than direct government briefings, was that the government intend to undertake further lockdowns in the north, and it lit the fuse to a firework that has been waiting to go off. The anger is palpable and should come as no surprise, particularly when there's no evidence that these decisions are evidence-based. They are Labour areas in the north in lockdown, with far lower rates of infection than many Conservative areas in the south. The anger is felt not just about the lack of caring for the north, it's also about the lack of trust. Dominic Cummings' little trip to Bernard Castle was just the start of the downward journey for the government on this metric. The track and trace, the world-beating service that was going to turn around tests in 24 hours, is an abysmal failure. There is more than a sniff of corruption around the handling of the most contracts issued for the services of equipment needed to deal with this pandemic. And each week brings a new scandal. This week, the news that the Housing Secretary, Robert Jerrick, allowed 25 million of government funding to his Newark constituency from the town funds, a hardship fund that is part of the government's levelling up initiative for areas with multiple levels of deprivation. Ranking only as the 270th most deprived area in the country, Jerrick originally, allegedly, shall we say, said that the funds could be used to restore the town's 12th century castle gatehouse. Of the 61 towns selected to receive the money, 60 are in constituencies won by the Conservatives at the last election. So, as you can see, if you're a Conservative, you get the money. If you don't, tough. And this is just a usual tactic for the Tories. Well, we'll give the areas that vote for us money, but those areas that don't, we don't care. Of course, this is just a tactic to try and win votes, and it's a very, it's lower than the lowest tactic I can think of to try and win votes. And yesterday's comments by the Deputy Chief Medical Officer indicate that the rise in the coronavirus cases in the north was because the disease level in the north never dropped as much as in the south. This confirmed what many of us had suspected, that the lockdown was lifted to suit the conditions for London and the south, not the north. It rankles that we continue to be a country dominated by a square mile in Westminster and Whitehall, and what's happening here is in large part due to the failure of a London-centric government and its failure to engage with the north. Johnson needs to recognise that the cooperation of the North is necessary to respond to the pandemic, and that means he needs to work continually. And in the immediate future, this means handling track and trace over to local authorities or even mayors. Johnson called last orders on the North, said one newspaper over the weekend. The sense of having something done to us, not by us or never for us, continues, and it is wearing thin, and we may yet be the ones calling last orders on Johnson. And I completely agree. This is really just shown the Conservative government what it always was. It's the party that just doesn't care about the North. It is the party that is so London-centric. It just doesn't care what goes on in these other parts of the country, because as far as it is concerned, if it works for London, then it must clearly work for other towns and cities, when it clearly doesn't. A town is completely different from a city, and even it's very obvious, but the towns in the north, such as in my area in Yorkshire, you've got Hull, Leeds, Sheffield, York. Those are like the big ones in the area. They're all different themselves from each other. They all have their own unique economies and things like that. So just because something works in London doesn't mean it's going to work in like Sheffield. Some of it may do, but it may not have the amazing impact that it had on London, and that's the part of the problem. And one big part, which I have said before and I've heavily advocated for, is that we need to get rid of this whole idea that you can just paradrop an MP into a seat that he's never even been or even visited. In the past in Barnsley, we've had Conservative MPs who have never been to Barnsley in their entire life, know nothing about the town, but were just selected to stand as an MP in this town for reasons. And they maybe turned up once. There was one MP we had a couple of years ago who never even turned up, never even set foot in the town. And yet he wanted to be the MP of this town. I've said there should be something done where MPs have to have at least lived in their town. And I mean, we're not just having a second home. Their primary postal address, where they live, where they work, should be in that town or region. Like I say, I'd be very happy if, like, maybe someone from Sheffield was an MP who stood in Barnsley. I'd be fine, because they'd be from Yorkshire. At least they know the area a bit more than someone who's maybe from down south in Dorset, where our last Conservative MP came from. So, like I say, it's very obvious the lockdown for the further north is coming, and it is going to be absolutely economically devastating. On top of that, of a potential no-deal Brexit, as I've said, you combine the two numbers together, and we're looking at least 30% of the UK's economy gone like that. That is disastrous. Disastrous. And with rumblings that Boris is about to go, it's typical Tory of, well, I've done what I wanted to do, so I'm going to let someone else clear up my mess. And unfortunately, I think that person is going to be Michael Gove. And Michael Gove just doesn't even care about the North as well. So, good job, guys, if you voted Conservative, because we told you what would happen. And, well, it's happened, just on a monumental scale. And please do hit that like and share button if you it does help out the channel. Of course, links below should you like to support the channel out in a different way as well. Thank you to the people that do, and of course we'll see you all next time.